Hey guys, welcome to Canna-Talk ND. If you guys haven't subscribed yet or anything like that, make sure to hit the subscribe button. You can also hit the like button down below. Obviously, you should probably watch the whole video before you hit the like button, but don't forget to hit that. We do a podcast every Sunday, and we also have Canna-Talk ND with Wilson, which is on the radio station 95.9, Radio Free Fargo. And that is from 4 to 5 p.m. on Thursdays. Next week's episode is going to be really, really good. A really interesting story and kind of an update to just some people that were involved with ND Freedom of Cannabis Act. So definitely make sure to watch that one. So one of the biggest things, and this is something that I noticed a lot of people not really doing, was they did a study last year when ND Freedom of Cannabis Act was circulating and legalized ND was just about to submit their petition. They were doing a study to kind of figuring out because they kind of guessed that at some point one or another is going to possibly legalize in North Dakota. Fortunately, that didn't happen this time around. Hopefully, 2022 is a thing. If, the world doesn't end by then, because at this point, I wouldn't be surprised. But they did do the study, and it was weird because they kind of ended it. The whole thing's a page. I printed it out here, and the whole thing ended up being a page, kind of cut off there. But that's basically the whole thing. And I kind of found some interesting blurbs in there, so I kind of want to go through it. News articles that even came out, they basically did like a paragraph. They didn't really go into it. I don't know. It's odd. It does end. The committee makes no recommendation with respect to the recreational marijuana study. That can be a good or bad thing, and we'll kind of get into that after everything. But let's just kind of go through it. According to the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, changes in marijuana policies across states legalizing marijuana for medical and recreational use suggests marijuana is gaining greater acceptance in society. That is first of all, National Institute on Drug Abuse is apparently having this view, which is very interesting. They're the ones who usually take a stance about just about everything. If it changes your perception, they're against it. But they also do studies, and actually a lot of the studies are very useful for a lot of different things, specifically like for me, for Kratom. And that's kind of been a good source to at least start off. So the fact that they're acknowledging that it's being more accepted in society, are taking the stance like, hey, society kind of fucked up back then, is basically what they're saying. So they went on to going with the 2015 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. They stated that marijuana is the most commonly used illicit drug. Go figure. With 22.2 million people reporting marijuana use in the last month. So if they're basing it off of the 2015 study, and that's kind of what I'm going under the impression, I found that interesting, so I was like, well, how many people in the United States smoke? The 2015 population count, let's go with that, of 320.7 million people in total, but we're also going to be talking about adults, obviously. So of adults, there's 247 million adults in 2015, whenever this was reported. So if we take 22.2 million people and 247 million adults, of those 22.2 smoked, that is almost 9%. I think that was 8.87 or something like that. 9%, which is actually a huge, if you think about it, 9% of the entire U.S., that's kind of a big deal. So they kind of broke down what Colorado and Washington usually take for taxes. So they say basically 30% of the total revenue is deposited in the general fund, 35% is dedicated to healthcare services, 10% being dedicated to education and prevention, and the remaining revenue is used for research and for local government and other efforts. So they, based on Colorado's 2017 revenue report, they indicated over $227 million was collected in taxes, licenses, and fees related to marijuana in 2017 alone. And they have a nearly $639 million collected since adult use sales began in 2014. So we're talking over 3 years, they got $639 million collected. And if we look at the two numbers side by side here, 227 in just 2017. So it's growing exponentially. Well, I don't know if it's exponentially, but it's growing. And that's kind of showing that there is an industry here. You kind of have to take it serious. If it's making $639 million over 3 years, like, can you imagine 30? Colorado's marijuana tax revenue accounts for 2.5% of the total budget. So that's in a grand scheme of things, obviously there's 98% other stuff, but 2.5% of Colorado's total budget, and provides for program oversight and enforcement for, you kind of have to have an oversight board for that. Local community enforcement assistance, school construction grants, substance use disorder and prevention, treatment efforts, and public health surveillance, and other public safety education efforts. Washington collected a total of $319 million in taxes and licensing fees in 2017, which was $113 million more than the liquor tax revenue in the same period. There's more people who would rather smoke than drink. And so that's an interesting aspect to look into. And so they also do talk about, where it's going. So 2.5% is used for things such as substance use disorder and prevention. So what that could very well be, could turn into, is basically people who end up having substance use disorders regarding opiates and amphetamines and all that stuff. They could, and I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon, but they could also start recommending cannabis for people as far as relapse prevention, or for, if it's opiates, pain killing, if they're, trying to stay away from opiates, cannabis is a very good alternative to that. So the fact that there's money being put into that means that at one point, if it becomes an accepted medical practice, that it can be very well interconnected in a very smooth fashion. And the fact that that kind of money, that cannabis money, is being used to effectively, pay for school construction grants, and for substance use disorders and all that stuff. A lot of people who end up in, treatment and all that stuff ends up being a, court-ordered type of a situation. But the fact that federally, when it comes to banking laws, it's not accepted. Cannabis money is dirty money. It's bad. Cannabis money, oh, no. They can't have a bank account. They can't. Nope, we can't help them. There's nothing we can do. But it's being used inside states. And obviously states are kind of, when they're taking a stance of legalizing or making a medicinal law in their state, they're obviously kind of going against what federally, and we'll be talking about federally here in a minute, but the fact that that is happening in states on a small scale, that can very well show that, hey, on a large scale, federally, that this can be an accepted practice, and this can be something that doesn't have as many downsides that a lot of states against it would say. I hate how it's a short blurb and they don't really go into it. Now, it could mean that they didn't get, enough statements or enough information to come to a conclusion, and that's probably what it means. But at the same time, they go into, and this is a really dangerous one, Colorado and Washington use a threshold of 5 nanograms or more of THC per milliliter of blood as a measurement of driving under the influence of cannabis. people who chronically smoke, you know, several times a week, every single day type of thing, THC lasts in your system at that point from 30 to 45 days. Now, if it's just a one-time off, it can be, you know, I've had instances where it lasted 7 to 14 days, but I don't know how much 5 nanograms is, but I would be willing to bet that there are people who end up possibly facing charges of driving under the influence that were not actually under the influence and had just smoked, you know, last night. And, you know, the whole waking up drunk type of thing, that's not what happens with cannabis. So it's not like you can wake up high. There's, you know, the after high, I guess is what you would call it, but you can't sleep through the night for 8 hours and wake up high, whereas with alcohol, you can, because alcohol is still breaking down your system, and your system can only break it down if it's a lot of alcohol. Your liver has to break that down, and there's still alcohol to break down by the time you wake up. And with cannabis, it's not the case. I guess I'm not 100% sure. I've never really done, you know, extracts. Like, I've never smoked wax or anything like that. But as far as plain flower, I don't know anybody who's woken up high, or, you know, even half a day later. But that's not to say that that's a good idea to drive. I mean, if they're saying 5 nanograms, it's not a good idea anyway. But that's kind of a weird thing, that they didn't really jump too far into that. So let's go on into the next one here. Several states with legalized marijuana and recreational marijuana use leave testing and employment decisions up to the discretion of the individual employer. Again, they didn't really go too far into it, but that is a very important thing to recognize here. I mean, at some point, there's a little bit too much oversight. Obviously, you know, things like driving a truck, there's a lot more stringent testing there. You know, even driving pizza delivery, there's a lot more stringent testing. A lot of those decisions are not actually too far up to the employer as much as it is the insurance that employers have to carry. So, like, if you have a driver, a pizza driver, for instance, you're delivering pizzas, in most cases, you have to provide, the employee has to provide their own insurance, but it's a different policy, or they have to add something onto it. But as far as the business goes, they also do have to cover the employee. You know, if they get into an accident while on the clock, they also have to cover that. And those are the things that's the reason why a lot of jobs, while, you know, you might have stoner boss number 3 or whatever, but, you know, they say no to people who test positive. That's usually the reason why. The business might accept it. You know, it's all up to your boss, obviously, but the fact that that's there is interesting. I wish they kind of went down the insurance avenue, because I think that would have unraveled a lot more information regarding employment and cannabis use. But yeah, let's go on to the next one. So the trend among states with employment policies that do have employment policies is, if an employee is not bringing medical marijuana to work, or working in a job in which impairment could result in serious harm to others, so pizza driver could possibly be one, a truck driver for sure is one. Employers are not authorized to take medical marijuana use or positive drug test results into consideration when making hiring and firing decisions, and that's only if they're not bringing it to work, being in an industry that, you know, that kind of has the reaction time, I guess. So that type of industry, that's usually where they have the most stringent rules. I know truck drivers, I think they have to get tested like once a month. It's insane. But yeah, so even in cases where there are laws regarding hiring and firing of people with cannabis, they're also going with the fact that if they're not bringing it to work, or they're not positive at the time, and that's the part, positive at the time, okay, 30 days again, we're talking about the 30 days, 30 to 45 days, that's kind of rough. And obviously, that's not the state's faults or any of the other faults. It actually has everything to do with how, science has everything to do with science. Let's go with that. You can't really figure out when that person last smoked. You can figure out if they have smoked in the last. You can even go back as 90 days with a hair test. But if they had a little bit more breakthrough in testing, I'm sure it would be accepted practice if they could figure out like a 7-day test or something like that. And I'm sure they probably are looking at that, but they're also probably looking at the probability that it's correct for false positives and everything like that. So yeah, if there was something new probably for it, I'm sure it would actually be an accepted practice. They go on into talking about federal law. So federal law, marijuana is a Schedule I drug, is considered dangerous, has no accepted medical value, and has a high potential for abuse. So that's kind of under federal law. And that has no accepted medical use. Again, what we were talking about, states and the federal government are kind of separated with these laws, but has no accepted medical value. I'm thinking actually possibly in this next presidency, we would be probably looking at descheduling, or not descheduling it, but maybe scheduling it lower. But there's actually been a little bit of an update about that. Biden had run with that being on his platform. It has mysteriously vanished from his website. I haven't really seen if it came back. But yeah, it has mysteriously vanished. But I'm hoping that over time it is something that's tackled, especially since there's also the States Act. I think that's going to be on for the next session. And States Act is about banking. But, if they have some sort of law regarding banking for cannabis industry, it would actually, kind of unlock the whole industry of this is not that big of a deal type of a deal. And so yeah, this one is, they're talking about that. And especially the no accepted medicinal value, you got states that have medicinal marijuana. And again, it's a federal law, it hasn't been changed, hasn't been updated, but that's kind of the reason it's chipping away at that statement. And that kind of a chipping away would make it really easy to just flip the switch and maybe make it Schedule 2 where opiates and benzos are, or even Schedule 3. But the whole no medicinal value, kind of relaying it to heroin, essentially it's in the same category as like heroin and acid. The fact that that's there, I think it will see it over. Then they also talk about the insane drama. In January 2018, Jeff Sessions issued a marijuana enforcement memorandum, which rescinded the Cole Memorandum, which allows federal prosecutors to decide how to practice enforcement and federal marijuana laws. I wish they kind of went a little bit more into that, but the Cole Memorandum, again, allowed federal prosecutors to decide how to prioritize federal marijuana laws regarding prosecution of them, obviously. The Sessions Memorandum directed the United States attorneys to weigh all relevant considerations, including federal law enforcement priorities set by the Attorney General, the seriousness of the crime, the deterrent effect of criminal prosecution, and the cumulative impact for particular crimes on the community. Obviously, federally, it's illegal and it's Schedule 1, so, there's really no positive statements out there from the federal government regarding cannabis, so that's why you see that. So then they go on to the testimony and the committee consideration. A representative from the Department of Health indicated it is difficult to determine the impact legalizing recreational marijuana would have on the medical marijuana program. Probably make it easier. They received considerable testimony indicating the general perception that states with legalized recreational marijuana benefit from increased tax revenue is not entirely accurate. They indicated that although the tax rate of marijuana is nearly 30% in Colorado, less than 1% of marijuana tax revenue goes directly to the state general fund. Would you buy a very extravagant whatever if you can't pay or feed yourself? No. Make sure all your bills are paid before you go on to pet projects, essentially. Obviously, not everything in the general fund is a pet project, but I'm just saying the things that haven't been earmarked, that's kind of where like a lot of people see what a general fund is as, like, basically, I think in North Dakota we call it a legacy fund. It's never been touched, and then, even if there's more money from, like, say, CARES Act, it just gets thrown into oil in North Dakota, which is a big industry, but, like, weird. So, yeah, the 30% tax consists of a 2.9% sales tax imposed on medical marijuana and a 15% wholesale excise tax and a 15% retail excise tax imposed on recreational marijuana. Testimony indicated that federal and state data suggest a loss of $10 to $15 for every $1 generated in tax revenue as a result of increased costs associated with public health, public safety, marijuana care, and other administrative costs. You'd think with that sentence alone they would have just closed the books and said bad. But, yeah, so they suggest a loss of $10 to $15 for every dollar generated in tax revenue. As far as increased costs associated with public health, public safety, and medical care, I can understand as far as medical care to a degree. I wouldn't say that it's... I would say that it's probably a misrepresentation to say that it was just for the increased costs on the public and just general health and safety and medical care. You do have some people who, they haven't either smoked since the 70s, or, they haven't smoked in a while, or they haven't smoked ever in their entire life. And end up smoking and, kind of freak out. It does happen a lot, actually. I think with California, when it just started, dispensaries were handing out pamphlets being like, hey, if this is your first time, don't go crazy. You got people have panic attacks and stuff like that. Nothing deadly. It's never deadly. And so public safety, I don't know. It would be also the fact that how are you calculating the cost against public safety? Like, how do you calculate that? In this case, they're calculating it in money, but how do you calculate that is the reason why, that cannabis was the reason why that was, against public safety? And other administrative costs, I can understand the enforcement aspect of it. And the thing is these types of costs and these types of things are the reason why a study like this exists, is to figuring out, like, hey, this is, these are the problems. The whole entire point of the entire deal was, these are the problems, these are the pros and cons, let's weigh those. So, yeah, I'm not 100% sure. That's a really, really weird statement. I don't know. I wish that there might be possibly, I'm not 100% sure, but I really wish that there was possibly, because I know when they were doing presentations, there's PowerPoints and everything like that. It would be interesting to see, like, how they came to that number. Again, we're just looking at, a breakdown of what they learned. But it would be interesting to see how they weighed that number. So then they go on to say the committee makes no recommendation with respect to the recreational marijuana policy or study, which is probably a good and a bad thing. The reason why this study was drawn was because A, these measures were coming out, but B, they were kind of sitting down to figuring out, if these measures go through, or if later on they go through, we have relevant information and data to this year type of deal, to make decisions of how, the laws should change. Because there's multiple aspects. Over and over again, we're talking about, taxes. I'm not a tax specialist. I barely know how to do my own taxes. But, the fact that they kind of came up with nothing is good in the aspect of they didn't say it's a terrible idea, we shouldn't even consider this. And I know in a news press release, I guess I'd call that, the legalized ND had said that they're going for legislative session. Good luck with that. But the fact that they're saying, makes no recommendation, so they're not saying a positive, but they're definitely not saying a negative. So that's all I got for you. Again, let me know what you think, what you would have liked to see, or anything like that. Leave a comment. It'd be really interesting to see what people think in just general. And if you guys have, one of the things that I guess I'm semi-decent at, not really that great, is kind of deep dives. So I'm thinking that this might be a thing that I do a little bit more often. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions, would like to see me cover something. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and we will see you guys I will see you guys on Sunday from 7:30 p.m.